Genesis House and the Friends in Recovery podcast are proud to bring you Answering the Call, the First Responder podcast. Join your hosts, Mike the Podfather and Jersey Ed, as they address the real issues in health and wellness for first responders, from physical and mental health to relationships and work-life balance. We leave no stone unturned. Answering the Call, the First Responder podcast is available on Facebook, Podbean, iTunes, and YouTube, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now, here are your friends in recovery answering the call. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Answering the Call, the First Responder podcast, sponsored by Genesis House and produced by Sweets Productions in Beverly, Mass. And now, here are your hosts, the Podfather Mike Miles and Jersey Ed.
Thank you, Sweets. As always, we are happy to be here, ready and available to help our first responders out there across the country and abroad.
That's right, Mike. I love learning all these new topics, and so do the listeners. We get all those good emails from everybody. And I also can tell by the social media chatter about what's been going on lately.
Sounds good.
So,
how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well.
You're sitting in the middle. Why?
I am. Well, we have a guest.
I see somebody over there.
A guest host.
What's up, Tom?
Hey, guys.
How are you?
Good.
Good. Are you a cop?
No.
Good.
No.
We only need one here.
Yeah, I get that a lot.
With
but
mine
no.
and Mike's past, our Sweet's past.
He gets nervous.
Yeah, I get nervous.
That's right.
So Tom is a friend of Friends in Recovery from a long time ago, and he's joining us today on Answering the Call. He has some experience with some first responders. Just tell us a little about what you do and who you are, Tom.
Yeah, that's right. I appreciate it. Thanks, Ed. My name is Tom Burruel, and I'm the co-founder of a company called Intervention 180. We're an intervention firm that's based out of Boise, Idaho. It's where we're based out of. We got a handful of folks throughout the U.S., but we definitely love the opportunity to be able to help those that are first responders in those critical moments.
Absolutely.
So-
Absolutely. And we love our interventionists. And speaking of interventionists, Sweet.
Yes.
How are you?
Yes, I am well. Thank you.
Aren't you an interventionist too?
I am also an interventionist. Yes, one of the many ways that I try to help people who are struggling with substance use and abuse.
Very good.
Fantastic.
And we have the Podfather sitting in the middle.
This is correct. And I'm also, I'm not an interventionist, but I've invented a few things. Hey, Sweets doesn't talk much about his book, which I think is a fabulous topic.
I know. We had the one show about it.
One show.
Why don't we refresh everybody's memory real quick about that?
Loving Lions is the name of the book.
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
So I wrote a book a little over a year ago called Loving Lions, which is it says it's a guide for families struggling with addiction, and it's just a little insight into my own personal experience and some of the things that I know a lot of families have questions about. You know, they're trying to wrap their heads around substance use and what their loved ones are going through and how they can be, the most supportive and understanding some of the steps that they might need to take to help them when they're dealing with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was thumbing through it, and it is chock full of information. And what I like about it is it has different paragraphs and different subtitles about what you're going to be reading, which, in and of itself, I think sometimes is great, especially if you're new to addiction. If you're a family member trying to help somebody in your family, someone you love, more than likely you're enabling that person, because it's just enabling and love are so close; they go hand in
Oh my
hand.
God. Yeah. It's a mask that we see. I'm sure you guys as interventionists see the parallel between both of that. That's a good point now, Mike, So our guest today, we're going to get to her in a few minutes. She's a very dear friend of mine. I just have some stats that I want to run by you guys real quick. I like to bring some topics up. So Mike, you're a retired police officer, and we work with a lot of cops. That's kind of our thing, but we do work with all first responders. But I end up finding some pretty some pretty cool stuff on the internet. And everything on the internet is true. Is that correct, guys? Okay. I thought so. Real quick, I want to give you guys some stats to kind of think about. Over 900,000 Americans are police officers in the United States. I didn't know there was that many police officers.
Quite a few.
Yeah. You were one. You're in that statistic, Mike. I seen your name. I looked you up. And the best states to be a cop in. Just guess. Anybody take a guess what the number one state is?
I don't know. It says New York.
Yes, and it is New York. New York. That's right. New York.
What about Boston?
Boston, Massachusetts falls. These are states. Massachusetts falls number 8. and Jersey Ed State falls number 9.
Wow.
So so all of us fall into the top 10 except for Boise, Idaho.
Yeah.
I don't know where you guys are.
I don't. A handful of them.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
And the most law enforcement officers per capita, and I picked this one out particularly because of our guest. Number 1, Washington D.C. Most cops in a law enforcement per capita. New York is second. New Mexico is third. I don't understand that. Texas is, I understand, in Louisiana. And this list was, and I'll stop boring you guys after this, but this list was pretty cool too. The top 5 cities to be the best to be a cop in. Number 1 is Trenton, New Jersey. Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay, it gets better. Number 2, New York City.
Wow.
Yeah.
Number 3, Miami, Florida. Number 4, L.A. And number 5, rounding out the top 5, Atlantic City, New
Wow.
Jersey. Yeah, but
Didn't see that one coming.
yeah, but that list was based on salary, cost of living, and location. So, which I thought was pretty cool. Just some cool, some cool facts about police officers and where the best and the worst place to live is. So, anyways, that was my little tidbit about that today. So, Mike, what's been going on?
Well, things are good. Staying busy. Had a very busy last couple of weeks, helping people. Did my my second intervention on my own, and it didn't go too well, but we don't give up hope.
No. And sweets, and both the interventions, you guys can talk about them. They normally don't go as we plan them,
Right.
like a lot of times, right, guys?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you plan and you prepare for so many variables, but at the end of the day, there's so many different ways
Right.
that they can unfold.
Right.
So, what I know is that interventions are always successful. Things don't ever go back to the way they were, and that's really, there's that old adage, you can't help an addict until they hit bottom, and we know that's not true, right? But my experience is that interventions are held when families hit their emotional bottom. They've realized we can't do this anymore.
Absolutely.
And so, as long as we're able to help change that family system, people do recover.
Yeah, we plant the seed, I guess, and then I remember my seed being planted 25 years ago, and using wasn't the same. It always had that little bit of nagging in the back of your head, or I wasn't intervened on, but eventually I was in a spiritual and emotional way. But I knew every time I picked up a drink or I went to go knock on the dealer's door, I knew this wasn't the right thing to do at that point. So, but you guys are important. It's an important piece because families cannot do this alone. And I know that, Mike, you know that too, because of what we went through with our family members. So, so that's kind of and police officers, how tough is it to do a police officer intervention or a first responders intervention?
Well, I think personally, I mean, if somebody's in really dire need of getting some treatment, at least as a cop or a first responder, you can take it upon yourself, if this person's talking about hurting themselves or hurting someone else, that you can actually step into Massachusetts and you can have them committed for 3-day observation. And usually if somebody's that bad, they're going to keep them longer than 3 days. They'll find a place for them.
Now that's tough to commit a police officer, isn't it? As far as weapons go, because they immediately take their weapons. They that's a tough call for interventionists to do that, right?
Yeah, but I feel that anybody, and I've done that. I've had to be part of that several times, but I feel usually the family's aware what's going on, whether they live with a wife or a girlfriend or their parents or a roommate or by themselves. People around them know what's going on, and they're more than happy to see them go away, because the people caring for them, the enablers or the loved ones, they get to get a couple nights sleep and not worry about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's definitely a touchy situation in that field. I mean, and even in just a regular intervention, we can even be talking about the first responders' families. Even it doesn't. We're always talking about first responder here, but there's the families too. I mean, how many times have you guys got calls as interventionists from a first responder doing the right thing, but their wife or their husband or their kids are having problems? I mean, that's probably common also.
Well, absolutely. And I think the thing that does get missed is how the family is reacting to their loved one. They're walking on eggshells. They're avoiding certain conversations. They're oftentimes doing their own crisis management at home,
Right.
And then they're also straddled with, they don't want them to lose their job or their respect or their career, all of those things as well. So it's that double-edged sword. They know that their loved one needs help. At the same time, there's kind of this risk. It's that fear of the unknown. How is this going to play out?
Yeah,
Correct.
So that's why it's important that it's done in a professional manner, done with out of a spirit of love, care, and compassion is what I like to do.
And that brings us full circle around to your book, Sweets, is Loving Lions.
Mhm.
And that book is really important to families, how to get help and how to
Well,
stay
how to love
course.
them appropriately.
Yeah, love them appropriately,
they're
yeah.
struggling with something, and I think a lot of people they react
Yeah.
instead of responding. And a nice measured response from a place of love,
That's
as
right.
Tom was talking about, is probably the most important thing you can do. And having that compassion and understanding what they're going through instead of persecuting them and vilifying the substances, and realizing that that's how they're dealing with what's happening in their life. And it's definitely a lack of life skills or tools
Mhm.
rather than like a drug problem or an
Yeah.
alcohol problem. There's
Or a
something else
behavioral
there.
health problem, because you
Correct.
guys do interventions for behavioral
Absolutely.
health too, for mental health,
Right.
and all that too. So I mean,
Yeah.
that's kind of again, this show isn't just about substance abuse, because the whole panel, I believe, not outing anybody, but the whole panel here, I believe, is in recovery. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I qualify.
Okay, good.
Happy to not be anonymous on that one.
Yes,
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
Well,
So-
I was gonna have Mike cut it out if you
Yeah.
weren't.
Well, we have a guest today that I know is going to talk quite a bit about her role in this as well.
Yep.
So do we want to bring on Beverly Anderson, Dr. Anderson, who is going to join us? She is the clinical director and administrator of the Metro Police EAP program, and I'm going to go ahead and we're going to welcome Beverly.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Good. Hi, Beverly. How are
Doing
you?
well.
I'm good. I do have a correction. I'm not with the Metro Police. There is a Metro Police in Washington, D.C. It's the Metropolitan Police, which is the police department for Washington, D.C.
And when I met Beverly about 7 years ago, I got that same talk. Right in that office, I believe.
Yes, sir.
It's good to see you and hear you, Bev. We were just together a couple weeks ago, and I had a crisis coming into your office, and you calmed me down, and the car accident didn't seem as bad as it was.
That's what friends are for, right?
Exactly. It's always a pleasure seeing you.
Back, Ed.
Yes, you do, absolutely. And Beverly is done wonders for DC and the Metropolitan Police Department and the health and well-being for the police officers down there. I mean, just some of the stuff that you accomplished and you're able to get around and do for these police officers. And she takes no shit from anybody, okay? And especially the police officers, they really respect her. They really, I see when I go to her office, I see police officers coming in and out all the time, and a lot of respect in that office. And you earn that respect, and it's great when I come into that office. It's great to see all that. So thank you for everything you do down there.
Thank you. We have a great team.
Yes, you do. You want to tell us a little bit about what you do down there? Because I know. So let's tell the audience what you do down there.
Okay, so we are a union negotiated program. It's a joint union management program, but it is a freestanding program, a counseling program for police officers, police officials, and for their families. And we began in 1988. So the freestanding part of it is probably one of the most important aspects because, as you gentlemen know, police officers are not paranoid, they're just not as trustful, let's put it that way. And the whole issue of confidentiality is number one with law enforcement officers, and they need to trust you. And
Absolutely.
Well, there's a lot of trust in that office, no doubt about it. One of our previous shows, we were talking to Phil, who took over for John Lackman down at Genesis House. I asked him, how do you build that trust up? Well, because he was a police officer, he has that trust automatically. But something with you, when they walk into your office, and even myself, you and I speak a lot of personal stuff too. And I trust you. The minute I walk in that office, I trust you, and things that we talk about, I know is just going to stay right there, and that's it. So I can imagine what the police officers are kind of going through. And you also have police officers and retired military folks on your panel also, right?
Yes. So the answer is yes. We work with the military. I spent a year at Walter Reed in the Department of Neurology treating brain injured soldiers who also were suffering from PTSD. So, and we have many police officers who returned from deployment in the military. So it's yeah, been a lot of years.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, and Mike, if you listen to the shows, and Mike is a retired police officer, and he also ran the EAP as a peer-to-peer in Lowell, Massachusetts, and he has a lot in common with you.
You're better looking than I am, Beverly.
From Massachusetts.
And
Yes.
she's from Massachusetts.
Oh, and from
Yes.
Massachusetts. Whereabouts? What part?
Well, River.
Fall River, yeah.
Oh, there it was. There you heard it.
Fall River. You must be a tough girl.
Fall River.
Oh, she is.
I'm a top 40 geek.
She's definitely tough out there.
That's a nice part of the state, no doubt about it. Talk about some rough and tumble people down there. It's a tough place.
Yeah,
But I really admire. I was reading all your stats and all your accomplishments here, and wow, what you said about trust is so true. I was a cop for 35 years. I had my own issues back in the 80s, and I was fortunate enough to find a police psychologist. His name was John Barry. He was out of Stoneham, Mass. And when I went to see him, he said, you really don't belong at work. It's not what I really wanted to hear, but at the time, he gave me some good advice. And, I went away and got some help, and I went back to see him, and he had a battery of tests for me to take, and he told me, he said, somebody that wants to, hurt their chief with piano wire probably shouldn't be out there with a gun. So, at the time I had all this anger and confusion going on. I was a younger guy, and, when I got my master's in social work and my license to do therapy and alcohol drug counseling, I often think of Dr. Barry, and sometimes I'm telling cops things they don't want to hear, like they shouldn't be at work, but I feel like they do trust me, and the fact that I've done the job, I've been there, they kind of take the advice a little easier, and so I'm sure you've probably dealt with situations like that yourself.
I think to work with police officers, you have to be passionate, because police officers, more than anybody else, can see through the bull.
Right. You're allowed to say the other word.
Yeah.
Yes.
100%.
Because I know you say those words.
They don't say that in Fall. They don't talk like that in Fall River.
Yeah.
So,
So tell us a little bit about the practice, and do you see civilians, or is it just police officers? And do you see a lot of PTSD, and how do you treat that? And kind of go into a little bit about what you do over there.
well, we see just police officers and police officials, and I'll tell you an interesting statistic. We see the same percentage of high-ranking officials on the police department as we do rank and file police officers. And I say that it's important, because if your managers trust that what happens here is sacred and confidential, then they'll use the program. And I think that speaks volumes.
Certainly.
We've been doing this for 30 years, and it took 30 years. It's not, everyone wants a magic formula, especially with police suicide being first and foremost in the news lately. They want a magic formula. How can we go to a class, or what's the quote unquote magic bullet? There's no magic bullet.
No.
And it's really having a comprehensive program that starts with really good screening, because not everyone can be the police. I couldn't be the police. I have a Portuguese
Amen.
temper. It never worked, right?
Right.
You'd be
Not
pulling your gun
everyone
out on
can be-
everybody.
Right. But really good screening, and then beginning in the academy. And we are so we're so fortunate to have a police chief and a history of police chiefs who believe in the program, who support the program. So we're a part of the training in the academy with the recruits, creating a culture where it's not only okay to ask for help, it's important to ask for help.
Yes.
It's important, and it shows that you're resilient. It acknowledges that, you know what, this is an incredibly difficult profession that you're involved in. You can't even be the same person at home that you are on the street.
Yeah.
I mean, that bifurcation in itself is so stressful.
Yeah,
Such a
So
good point.
we've been able to establish a culture where it's, if you ask a police officer, "Are you okay?" What is the officer going to say? "Yeah, I'm fine. Don't worry."
And what does fine mean, Tom?
That's right.
Tell the audience what fine means.
Fucked up, insecure, neurotic, and emotional.
Yes.
Is that about right?
That's about right.
Yeah.
If you take that out of the equation, it's not, do you need help? It's, oh, you've just been involved in a shooting. You've just seen a baby death.
Right.
You need to go down to EAP, or we come right to the scene. When there is a critical incident, we don't wait till the next morning. We go to the scene right then and there.
Yeah, I love that.
And that's part and parcel because the union works together with the department, because the number one important thing here is the health and welfare of your most important resource, and that's your police officers.
Yep.
Boy, such a good point.
100%.
It'd be nice if society saw it that way. Hey, when we come back from our break, we're going to talk more with Beverly Anderson. Any more things?
No, that's it. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back, guys.
Right back.
Right.
Since 1992, Genesis House has been helping real people heal from addiction on their private recovery campus in beautiful Palm Beach County, Florida. Their family-owned program is accredited by the Joint Commission and offers detox and dual diagnosis treatment in a comfortable and confidential setting. The First Responder Recovery Program at Genesis House is led by a doctorate-level therapist with direct professional experience as a first responder himself. Treatment modalities focus on psychiatric care, relapse prevention, stress management, and trauma-informed care for PTSD. Learn why their individualized approach makes a difference for first responders. Call Genesis House today at 1-800-737-0933 to speak with someone who understands. Visit them on the web at www.genesishouse.net. It's time to start your journey to a long and successful recovery.
Welcome, everybody. Friends in Recovery podcast, answering the call. We're here with our guest, Beverly Anderson, Dr. Beverly Anderson. And Beverly, before we went to the break, we were talking about believing in the upper echelon, having the same beliefs as far as police officers' stress, anxiety, issues with substance abuse, marital problems. It is a high rate of suicide now. It's probably worse than it's ever been. And police have always had one of the highest rates of suicide in any profession. So what do you think the answer is? How do we get rid of this this epidemic?
Well, I think the way that you get rid of it is by, we get amnesia. The interest in and the attention paid to depression or post-traumatic stress disorder kind of waxes and wanes depending on what's in the news. So when we have a police suicide or a spate of police suicides, people become, law enforcement agencies are reactionary anyway. And they're in the moment and they're about crisis intervention, but then it quickly passes. Once the funeral has taken place, then it quickly passes and there are other interests. And I think that because police officers aren't in the business of talking, because they're the caretakers, they're the helpers, you got to suck it up and drive on. You have to numb out. You can't get emotionally connected to this, because police officers aren't going to be the ones to complain. What has to happen is that police departments and cities have to recognize it's not good enough to just select good candidates. You have to take care of police officers, because what officers are exposed to, nobody calls police officers to tell them they're having a good day, right? You're
Right.
exposed to tragedy, man's inhumanity to man, victimization. Even nice people in fancy suits and fancy cars lie to the police. It's very difficult. So the answer is we have to provide those measures to take care of our first responders. Compassion fatigue is a terminology that has become very much overused. But you've got to put your mouth, your money where your mouth is. We can't just continue talking about it. We have to do something about it. And doing something about it. This was a great example. Unions and management have historically had a great deal of tension. But what these two entities agreed on is, wait a minute, we have to take care of our officers. Let's put our heads together and get a program that works, and one that is separate and apart, that doesn't take orders from the department, doesn't take orders from the union, is a separate entity that only deals with police officers, because it's a whole other kind of counseling when you work with police officers. There's so
Right.
much trauma.
You're a breath of fresh air, that's for sure. What you're saying. I think Tom had something he wanted to say before the break. Tom, could you repeat what you said earlier?
Well, sure. I was just before the break, we had you had just shared about how 30 years you've been at this and really established a culture and had the buy-in, and now that you're integrated in the post academy there, I think it's fantastic. I wish that we had something like that nationally. I mean, I really feel like that really needs to be done at every post academy, is this educating around mental health. And because law enforcement, I mean, they're in every fabric of our community, and they serve as that role model. And if they could set that tone of being known for, not only are they there to serve and protect, but they have the willingness to reach out for help, I mean, the impact that could have to just lay people that are, when you see a police officer have a willingness to receive help or get help in a time of need, that message, I think, could just be so powerful. And unfortunately, they're one of the last ones to get the help. And we definitely know that communities need to spend that investment, that resource, because that's what I mean. It's not as though anyone can be a police officer. They shouldn't be.
Absolutely not. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And you guys do that over there. You go over to the academy and you do an all-day training for them, don't you, as far as mental health, behavioral health, and substance abuse?
We train the recruits when they first come into the police academy. We train all promotions. So when an officer is promoted to detective or sergeant, lieutenants, captains, we train everyone. That's an integrated part of what you have to have is a comprehensive program. It's not an event, it's a process. It's a process that starts with proper selection and then taking care of your officers, having stress management classes. But most importantly, I think having access to therapists who just work with law enforcement, who get the terminology, who understand what these men and women go out and do every single day.
Yeah. Bev, I want to go back a little bit what you were saying, and you and I had this discussion in your office a couple weeks ago. The vetting process of police officers. I like what Tom said. Not everybody can be a police officer, and everybody that signs up to be a police officer not necessarily qualifies to be a police officer. And that vetting process, I think, should be a little bit more stricter and a little bit more stringent to kind of figure out if that is the right person for this job. And mentally, physically, obviously physically, but mentally also. And because the physical part, you can see a young man coming in and saying, okay, he's strong and he's going to do good. He's going to do 20 pull-ups and run 20 miles or whatever the case may be. But we can't look into their head. We don't know where they've been. We don't know what kind of trauma they have, what kind of childhood they had, and what's going on. So I think that vetting process that you were speaking about previously definitely can be upgraded or even enhanced somehow. And I like what you said also is that this is an ongoing process. It's not just at the academy. It should be ongoing. You should be in every police department, every precinct, or not you, but a program like yours should be intertwined like an exercise program.
Yeah, I think that debriefing programs and psychological services, whatever you want, counseling, it is essential, but it has to be trusted. That's the thing. It's taken 31 years, almost 31 years, and my almost going to jail one time because I refused to give a judge an officer's file. And I told her I'd
Nice.
close the program before I did. And she was a nice judge. I didn't want to go to jail, but I was ready to go to jail.
Good for you.
And
Yeah.
that is how sacred that trust has to be. Because
So
you know
true.
the other thing too,
Right.
you as law enforcement officers know so much of what happens in the darkness, what happens with uh, individuals that we think are supposed to be bastions of the community. And you know the real, see um, all kinds and all manners of bad behavior, if you would. So why would a police officer just trust you? Why trust no one? Everyone lies. That's what a lot of my officers say. What have you gotten from this profession? What have I gotten? Everybody lies.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
And Mike, can you testify to that?
Well, the mindset is definitely along those lines. You're suspicious of everybody. You trust nobody. The old cops, when I first came on, the advice was, be nice to elderly and children because all the other people in between will hate you, and don't trust anybody. I really believe I see the change. I really do. Unfortunately, the suicide rate for police officers and correctional officers is at an alarming rate, just as it is for veterans, war veterans. Mm-hmm. And, it's just so discouraging when you think a small percentage of society becomes involved in the armed services, maybe less than 1%. It used to be 1%, now it's less. And then the same thing with police officers. They used to call them the city's finest. And I think that what they meant was you had to go through some type of vetting, and the vetting was not just physical, mental too, but more physical back then. Now I think it's more mental, and it's amazing to me that when I do see police officers, they won't go see somebody, and I don't blame them, that could take away their rights to carry a firearm or take them off the road, because those people really don't understand the job. The unfortunate part, though, Beverly, as you know, and I'm sure you're inundated with people, is there's not a lot of us around. And I'm not putting myself in your category. You have a PhD. You're a very, very intelligent woman, obviously. But, right. But my credibility, along with my master's degree, is that I was a cop and I did the job and I had my own issues. And so my department, I was looked upon as somebody who made it, somebody that they could trust and they know they could. And I applaud you for almost going to jail, because that's the type of person I want to talk to when I have a problem.
That's right. And it's the trust that these guys need, and it's a trust that they have to, for them to open up and talk about, and if they don't have that, I'm sure they even think like, oh my God, is this going to go into, is my chief going to find out about this, or is this one going to find out about it? Me, even as a civilian years ago, I always tell my story. I was working for a big box store. I told this story last couple of shows, but I was working for a big box store, and I didn't want to tell my supervisor that I was going away for treatment. I was afraid that I was going to lose my job. Now, I was a salesperson, and I was afraid. I can imagine. I could have went to the other big box store and got another job. When you're a police officer, and if you lose your job because somebody said something, you're not going to be a police officer again. More than likely, you're not going to be able to get another job in another police department.
At least in our police department, it's acknowledged that there are some times when you can suffer from combat fatigue, so to speak, the combat of the streets, that the trauma that you're exposed to is cumulative. And we have great partners at the Police and Fire Clinic who get that as well. Sometimes officers need time off, but that doesn't mean, and then time off to get treatment, to be okay in their head, to go down to Genesis House and get 30 days because you just have to get away. And we don't lose police officers. They don't go down to Genesis House and then never come back again and don't have their gun. What happens is, are you okay? Are you good to do your job now? And that, I think that's what's so important, is having that trust within the police department that, no, so-and-so went for treatment. He's back on the job. Yes, you can get depressed. You can suffer from depression. PTSD doesn't mean that you're going to lose your job. You're going to work with it, you know? So, at least in our department, we've really been able to do that. But again, I mean, it's taken 30 years and many,
Sure.
many men and women.
And I think also that I do see some progress. We have a different peer counselors now. They have options to get trained, and you know, a lot of cops want to go get trained to be CISM, you know, critical incident, you know, specialists that can recognize stress, fatigue, you know, bad behavior, and they can go to that officer who's a peer, you know, one of their peers. They're working side by side and say, listen, you know that I've been trained. I think you ought to see somebody, and everything stays confidential. So some departments are progressive that way. I know up in Massachusetts, as liberal the state as it is, which, you know, is very disturbing sometimes, but I think for the police officers, we do have a lot more options than we used to have. Because I know when I had problems back in '86, I was like, you know, like a red herring. I mean, there was nobody else around. You know, we had one guy in Boston. His name was Eddie Donovan. He's a very interesting study, doctor, if you ever get a chance. Eddie Donovan was a Boston cop with an alcohol problem. He went and got help, and he got sober, and he started helping other cops. And he started the first, I guess what you would call EAP. Basically, it was a Mattapan, and he had cops go to meetings. Unfortunately for Eddie, he didn't take care of himself, and eventually he started drinking again. He got caught shoplifting at a place called Leechmere, and you know, his credibility went out the window. But as a result of Eddie Donovan, the other programs started up. I really believe that cops helping cops, and I went to a seminar back in '88 down in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and it was a cops helping cops seminar. They had FBI agents that were recovering and everything. And so there are organizations out there that do help. Unfortunately, like you said earlier, if the administrators at the top don't subscribe, then nobody else is going to get it or trust it.
Yeah.
Beverly-
And go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I have a couple questions here real quick for you. I was just curious to hear from you what you see most. Is it, are you seeing officers that have had a major critical incident, or kind of the death by 1,000 paper cuts? You know, like, do you see one versus the other more predominantly?
No, we have a lot of trauma. We have
Okay.
a lot of trauma that police officers are exposed to.
So the compounded trauma is just as equal as
Compounded trauma. So and it's cumulative exposure to the traumas
Right,
day
right.
after day after day.
Right.
And you know, as I said before, police officers have two worlds. There's two worlds. There's the world where you work at, and the world where you have your family and friends. And there's so much isolation within this profession because you don't go home and go into gory details about that homicide scene that you were on. So, because number one, you don't want to talk about it because you can't get emotionally connected to every scene that you're on. If you then you couldn't be the police if you did that. So you have to numb out. Numbing out is an adaptive and resilient coping mechanism that police officers have to use. So you can't just switch off and go home and say, okay, you know, daddy's home, and no, because you're impacted by what you've seen. So how do police officers then go home? When they go home, are they commanding, ordering, directing, preaching, moralizing, giving shoulds? Because that's your image armor is still on.
That's
So
right.
I mean, that's really difficult when you think about it. And then, so it's the trauma. So you're one way at work, where when you put your hands on somebody on the street, that's not usually a pleasant experience. So when you come home, what do you do?
Right.
How do you deal with family members?
Right. How do you transition? Right.
Yes.
Let me ask you one other question I wanted to ask you was, if there was let's say there's a officer that's listening to this right now, what would be the one thing you would want them to know about reaching out or getting help? What message, what thing would you like them to know right now?
In 31 years of doing this work, I have never met RoboCop. There's no
Right.
There is help. You know, there's a national hotline for police officers, and it's staffed by retired police officers or active police officers. It's called Copline, Copline. Stephanie Samuels is the executive director. She is the founder of Copline.
That's up in New Jersey.
That's exactly
Yep.
right.
Yep. I'm sorry, again, finish your thought on that.
I mean, so don't hold it in, because, it's not about surviving a police career. Surviving, I don't know about you, but the people who live on the grapes, these are people who are surviving. It's more about thriving, about getting to the end of your career and enjoying that well-deserved retirement and being able to enjoy peace and
100%.
have your family there. This is a profession. I know police officers don't believe me when I say, from a neuropsychological standpoint, the kinds of demands that are made on police officers' brains and limbic systems is incredible. I don't know of any other occupation where it's not just the danger, it's just your limbic system is so hyper aroused, which is why one of the problems within law enforcement is self-soothing behaviors like taking alcohol. Because if you're on an adrenaline high, you don't just automatically turn that off. If you've been in a high-speed chase, if you've had an encounter with a man with a gun, you don't go home and just say, I'm at the end of my shift, because you have all those stress hormones coursing through your body, the adrenaline, the epinephrine, the norepinephrine.
Yep.
You can't, you're in a survival mode, and the survival brain is the most primitive brain. And obviously it has worked because we're still around as a species.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And Mike, I'm sure you've been in that mode hundreds and hundreds of times that Beverly was just talking about.
I love listening to you, Beverly. Honestly, it's like getting a massage here, listening to you. I'm so in tune with what you're saying, and you're so right. The substance use, the infidelity, the gambling, the what we used to call it the morbid humor. Somebody hung himself, and I remember a captain coming through the door. We were waiting for him to show up, and I'd been on about 14 months, and he said, "Oh, is he hanging around again?" And everybody looked at each other. Were we supposed to laugh? Was he kidding? And and he's like, "I don't know why someone hasn't cut this guy down yet, but he's not getting any younger." And it was just like it almost. But I got to say, those few little sentiments that he dropped before he left, kind of gave us a little chance to laugh and look at this as, all right, this is part of the job, is basically what he said.
Right.
Cut him down, let's go. So, and you don't go home and tell, hey, guess what happened? Well, I didn't anyway. I never did. And not that I was a hero. I just didn't want to, like you said, I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to relive it again, Yeah. But I can tell you that building where that man hung himself, there's not a day that I go through Lowell, if I'm in that neighborhood 30 years later, I don't think of that man that was hanging there, or the couple that committed suicide, like Romeo and Juliet, asphyxiated themselves with the carbon monoxide. I can name 1,000 things that stuck in my head. Did it make me do drugs and alcohol, or drink more? I don't know. Maybe it did. I don't know. But I know one thing. I got sober early in my career, 5 years into it, and I was sober the last 30 years of my career. I know it made me a better cop, and it made me a better father. It made me a better man in general, but it definitely made me a better police officer. And I know when I walked into my retirement party, which was a surprise, I was stunned at the amount of people that were there from all walks of life, from judges to people that literally lived in a shelter. And you know what? My wife said, "Who are these people over here?" And I said, "Hey," and I brought them up. These are my friends. They lived in a shelter. My son had invited them to the retirement party, But anyway, my point is, to get to that point, life expectancy of the average male is 80 years old, 79, because of the opioid epidemic. These are the stats I see. The average life expectancy of a cop is about 60, and that's no way to go through a career. And you can reverse the curse if you take the advice of this doctor that's talking right now. 100%. You are such a breath of fresh air. I mean that from the bottom of my heart.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And Beverly, thank you very much. We're running a little bit out of time here, and let's have you back on. Let's do this again. I'll probably be in your office. Talking again, and but you are a breath of fresh air. I love coming to see you, and this was a wonderful show. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you, and thank you for your service, gentlemen.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Dr.
Bev.
Anderson.
Thanks,
You are
Bev.
the best.
Thank you, Beverly.
Absolutely. Well, that was a good show, guys.
Well, she walks the walk, huh?
Oh yeah,
Wow.
yeah. She knows her stuff.
Where do we find doctors like that?
You don't. Yeah, I mean, she's one in a million. When I walked in her office, the first time I met her, I was like, at first I was a little skeptical because, of course, I knew you, Mike, and I knew everybody, and she wasn't a police officer. And I sat down and I spoke to her for the first 5 minutes. I knew this woman was legit. I knew
awesome.
that she had it, and she knew what these police officers needed, and it was amazing. We need more people out there
are
like
you kidding
Beverly
me?
Anderson. We really do.
Yeah, I think the thing that sets her, I mean, well, it's just people that have a passion, right? And she said it. She said it. Law enforcement
Tom.
knows.
You're right.
They can see it coming if your heart's in it and if you're passionate about it. Then maybe we have a foundation to build some trust on.
Absolutely,
and they're
yeah.
able to reach out.
And that was passion right there.
Absolutely.
I mean,
And
you
I'll
can
say this:
see it.
I've been to D.C. a dozen times, half a dozen times. I'm sorry, and that's a tough city. It's a beautiful city, but that's a tough city and a tough place to work because you don't make many mistakes down there. Those Capitol police officers, they get one strike, not three, one strike, and they're out. There's just too many people waiting in line for those jobs.
Oh yeah,
That's
yeah.
right,
That job is, and also when they're locked in, they're locked.
Right, and she looks like a kid. She doesn't look like she's been doing this long.
I know,
For Christ's
30
sake.
years,
She looks-
30
She
years.
looks like she's about 30.
I know. She
yeah.
keeps herself in good shape.
But that's what happens too. Is when people find their passion, it's not work, right? You know, I
Yes.
mean, when you see someone that's really worn the age of time on their bodies, it's
Right.
because they've been working, right?
Yeah.
And their work has been a drain on them.
Yeah,
But
yeah. And
when
a lot
you
of police
find
officers
someone
are
who's
definitely like that.
They're in their sweet spot. This is their passion.
Right.
They do it.
And I
you know,
agree.
from that place.
That's why I look like Uncle Fester from the Adams.
No,
Family, you know?
no, Mike, you look good.
You know?
Whatever.
65 years old. I
No.
feel like I'm 80.
Yeah,
No,
no,
I can barely move from
not
where I
at
sit.
all. Good Lord, no, you listen, Mike. You helped a lot of people, and I watched the last podcast with Bob Cox, on the Friends in Recovery Addiction podcast.
Yeah.
And that was you guys need to tune over to that channel and watch that last show with Bob Cox because he said wonderful things about you. He
Yeah,
really
yeah,
did.
he did, yeah.
And Bob goes off on a lot of things. We know him personally, but let me tell you, when he speaks, it's from the heart, and everything he's doing for that the recovery center that he's setting
Bridge
up,
Club,
the
right,
Bridge Club.
right.
You're involved, and you know what pissed me off about that podcast. You went down a long line of list of things. You said this person was doing that, and Bob had, and I was not pissed off, but Bob had to recognize you, all the work you fucking did for that recovery center or for the Bridge Club.
Yeah.
So police officers are very humble, and they're very last in line. I'm sitting right next to the last in line one. He won't take credit until the very end, and it's true. You won't. I mean, I know you for 10 years now, Mike, and you put everybody on a pedestal, but we need to put you on a pedestal for everything you did in those 30 years or 35 years as law enforcement. You helped a lot of people. There's a lot of shit that you've seen, but what about the little old lady you helped cross the road? How about all those kids that you bought presents for and during Christmas that didn't have it? I mean, come on. I mean, that's unbelievable what you did, but that doesn't make the newspaper.
No,
you
it
know
does,
what I mean?
and a lot of cops do that. Let me tell you, I work with police officers that did stuff like that, and you don't look for credit, but
No,
Hey,
you don't. You're right.
what a
You're right.
great show, Tom. So glad you can make the show today.
Absolutely,
Sweets.
Tom.
Did we do a good
Absolutely.
job?
Thank you.
Gotta
You
hear
guys
some
were
sweets.
fantastic.
Yeah.
This was great.
All right. Well, this is Friends in Recovery podcast, answering the call.
Yep.
And this has been one of our probably better shows, I believe. And,
Absolutely.
you can join us for future episodes by subscribing and help us spread the word by sharing across social media. And I want to give a special thank you to our sponsor, Genesis House, for making this possible, along with our producer extraordinaire, Sweets,
That's
and
right.
Sweets Studio,
That's
podcast
right.
studio.
That's right.
For
And Beverly Anderson too.
Oh, and for broadcasting this podcast with Dr. Beverly Anderson,
Yeah,
who is without a doubt probably one of the most knowledgeable, well-spoken, and just in tune with what's going on. If you're out there and you're listening and you're hurting and you need help, and if you live in the D.C. area, feel free, call Dr. Anderson, because boy, I'll tell you, she'll steer you in the right direction.
Absolutely. And if you want to get a hold of Dr. Anderson, get a hold of Mike. Mike, you can always get a hold of Mike. Mike, give out your
Right,
information.
978-459-4884. That's my office, 978-459-4884. Therapy services. I'm in Chelmsford, Massachusetts.
And he'll get in touch with Dr. Anderson for you. Or you can email us at help@friendsinrecovery.org. podcast.com. And if you have any questions, you can use that email too. We would like, would like to be a guest on the show, or submit a question or a question for topic. Please visit our Facebook page. That's always a good way of getting a hold of us. You can you can request Beverly Anderson's information there too. At Answering the Call First Responders Podcast, or send us again an email at help@friendsandrecoverypodcast.com. One other thing, I know we didn't mention this on the last few shows, but send in those patches, your department patches. We want to start hanging them up. I got a couple coming in.
Yep. We'll have some next week.
We'll have some next week, and we'll give some shout outs to the departments that send them. Email me, and I'll send you the address. So
Very cool.
Super.
And as always,
we are grateful for your privilege, for the privilege to share our stories, insight with you, the listener.
stay safe, everybody.
That concludes this episode of Answering the Call, the First Responder Podcast. Thanks to Genesis House for sponsoring the show and supporting our first responders who are struggling with addiction and mental health. Follow us on Facebook for past shows and updates. If you are interested in becoming a guest on the show, email us at help@friendsandrecoverypodcast.com.